Be sure to go to flipsidegaming.com, use promo code 6 for 10% off on orders over $10. Do the same with the Grizzly Gentlemen. There are fantastic deals and help support the show. What is up, Planeswalkers? Therox 6 back with some more video format Death in Texas primer for Historic. Today we're going to be going over the 3 drops, and same as last time, we do have another comment submission, essentially asking about my thoughts on Swift Response. So Swift Response suffers a similar issue that Swallow a Hole did, in that it requires the creature to be tapped. The difference is that this is at instant speed, which does mean you will be able to get rid of it before damage is dealt. That said, it still has an issue of, Swallow Hole at least was 1 mana. This is 2, which is unfortunate. It also does destroy, which is another small hit against it. And most importantly, shoot, it was in my brain. Nope, I don't remember. I said it was cost 2 and it destroys instead of exiles. No idea what the most important thing was. Anyway, for what it's worth, it's usable. Oh, right, most importantly, it still has to hit a tapped creature. My brain RB good. So yes, I still don't love this. It's okay if you're just getting beaten down by things, but one of the things that I really want to focus on here is some creatures have Vigilance. Cough Cough, Elder Gargoth, Cough Cough, Questing Beast. Like, those are still creatures that you're going to want to kill. This can't kill those, so. Aven Mind Sensor. This is where we really get into the sweet taxes here. Aven Mind Sensor is fantastic. 1, it has flash, 2, it has flying. It is a 2/1, but who cares? Because it stops your opponent from searching their entire library, only forcing them to search the top 4. This is obviously fantastic with cards like Ghost Quarter and Field of Ruin, in which you're going to be able to say, hey, I'm going to destroy one of your lands. You better get lucky and hope that you have not only a land, but specifically a basic in your top 4 cards. Additionally, if your opponent is going to play a turn 3 Cultivate, you can flash this in and say, haha, now you have to get 2 basic lands in the top 4. I mean, they don't have to. You can theoretically fail to find, but they have to get 2 in order to get their full value, right? So Aven Mind Sensor is very fantastic. It is better in a format like Modern, where there are decks that are playing main deck fetches, right? In a format where you have the normal fetch lands where your opponents are cracking these things relatively frequently, searching the library relatively frequently, Aven Mind Sensor is going to be stronger. That said, it still has a reasonable presence here. 1, we do have Fabled Passage, but 2, we have a decent amount of ramp decks that do use Cultivate. One of the issues that I've talked about recently is the fact that we have things like Growth Spiral and Explore in Historic right now, which don't have you search, which is annoying, because that means Aven Mind Sensor can't deal with it. Great card. Banishing Light, it's removal, it hits anything, but it's just not a creature. Like, I mean, that's the biggest thing, right? Like, when you have Apparition, which is something that is in this 3CMC video as well, that card just does pretty much everything you want it to do. Yes, Apparition is double white pip, which is something you'll have to focus on, but we are primarily going to be a white-based deck, so it shouldn't be too much of an issue. And 2, Apparition does only hit 4 or below, but generally speaking, that's kind of where you're going to want a card like that. Obviously, there are going to be 5 mana, 6 mana threats, maybe even 7 mana threats. I can't think of any off the top of my head that are currently played, but you do still see some Planeswalkers at 5. You do see Nissa, for example, at 5. At 6, you have some Planeswalkers, Vraska. You also have Bolas' Citadel. You have things like that. So they're definitely... Oh, at 5, you also potentially have the Forsaken Monument. Although, for what it's worth, Forsaken Monument is a little bit easier to deal with because it's specifically an artifact. So just Banishing Light, I think, is just a little bit worse than Apparition, especially since I think Apparition is worded such that we can get funny use out of it. Badge Cat is better in a +1 counter version, but what it does do is it makes it so that one of your creatures gets indestructible until end of turn. So you're growing your Thalia, but you're also making it so that you can attack in with the Thalia. Death in Taxes is okay running 3 CMC walkers. There are several that we have to choose from. And yes, if you have Thalia down already, I do recognize that this costs 4, but still. Just having that option to grow a creature and make it indestructible means that you can put more pressure on your opponent, at least on the ground as well. And this card can get out of control very, very quickly. The minus ability is also decently nice. typically are going to have some of your creatures kind of throw themselves onto spears in the front line, because you'll be, you -2, you attack with like 3 flyers, you get 3 1/1s. Your opponent blocks favorably for 2 of your 1/1s, so you only get through for 1 on the ground, but still, that's a pretty decent thing. And if somehow you get to the emblem, you almost certainly have 1. It's a good consideration if you're looking to have either the +1 counter synergy, or you're looking to have some planeswalkers as essentially like inevitability, right? They're a little harder for people to deal with, and they can get out of hand. But Banish Marshal, if you're going like mono white, I can understand why you might want to play this. It's a lord that doesn't require you to have specific things. I actually wouldn't choose this in a night deck, because the night death and taxes would want several different colors, and I don't know if it will still want to play something with triple white pips, but I do think this is more of a trap. You're not white weenie, right? You're a deck full of white weenies, but you're not white weenie, and so I don't think that an effect like this is really what you're looking for. Citywide Bust could be. If we're going up against a lot of Gruul monsters, if we're going up against a lot of ramp that ramps into large creatures, not just planeswalkers, then I can see a world in which this is decent as a sideboard option. But for 1 more mana, we have Dusk to Dawn, which we'll talk about in the 4 CMC video. It's not, I'm not counting as 8 CMC, whatever time. This card can do good things, but it misses more things than it kind of hits that Dusk Till Dawn has access to. So, is it Dusk to Dawn? I think it's Dusk to Dawn. Banatha, if you're going for an artifact build, this is not terrible. She has First Strike, Vigilance, and Lifelink, so she is just a decent card, generally speaking. She is just annoying for more aggressive creature decks to deal with, because of the fact that she has First Strike and Lifelink, and she can attack on top of that because she has Vigilance. She does make your equipment spells cost 1 less, which does offset the kind of issues with Thalia. I don't see a world in which Aura Death and Taxes work. I think equipment are a little bit more valuable. Your creatures are already relatively small, and you aren't putting a bunch of... you don't really want to aggregate a bunch of your auras onto a single creature, because they do start out so small and they don't get huge bonuses. But also the auras don't stick around, so you lose too much card advantage, I think. But a build that utilizes very specific swords, playing this with Maul of the Skyclaves and maybe Dark Black Blade, maybe the Shadow Spear, things like that are definitely reasonable if you want to go that route. If you don't, even if you don't, for what it's worth, like if you're kind of missing some of the more rare 3-drop cards that we will go through, this is an okay option just because it is relatively decent in terms of just the keyword suit that it has. Gideon Blackblade is another planeswalker that we can utilize to some decent effect in this deck. It can, very similar to Basri, make one of your creatures indestructible this turn, or you can get some vigilance so that you can potentially race if your creature is already sizes up well against the opponents. Then you can attack in, or you can just give lifelink. Even if you're kind of just throwing something to the wilds, it is something that can potentially help you out. It also gets its attack as a 4/4, which is dope. And then it has just great removal on it if you can get to that point. Generally speaking, Gideon is pretty strong. I did not know the War of the Spark foil Gideon was this much money. Gideon of the Trials is a hilarious Gideon. This is more of a taxi card because you can just prevent damage that target permanent will deal. Now this does say permanent, so even if it's like an enchantment that like at the beginning of your upkeep deal damage to your opponent or something like that, you just be like, all right, boop, I'm not going to take damage from that. It can hit opposing Gideons, so like once they become creatures, you're just like, you're not going to hurt me. So that plus is actually nice. The 0 is also quite interesting because if you're able to just kind of protect Gideon, then you can slowly will your opponent's life total down in the air, and then of course it can become a creature, yada yada yada. This is okay. I just find that the other 3 drops are typically going to help me out more frequently. Hanged Executioner is technically exile removal, but you have to jump through a lot of hoops. If it exiled the token that it made, then it would be obviously like much better, but it doesn't, so it isn't. Heliod's Uncrowned. you're not a life gain deck. This can technically help you gain life against certain decks. However, the life gain is hidden behind mana. And I typically don't want to be not developing my board against like a mono red deck, for example. I would much rather just have Daxos or Nixley's Ram or something like that, because they're guaranteed blockers as well. History of Benelia. It makes knights. We're not a knight deck. Even if you're playing Death and Taxes with knights, this is for an aggressive deck. Also, you have Thalios. Get this out of here. Idyllic Tutor. As I already said, enchantments aren't really what we're looking for. They cost too much with Thalia, and there aren't too many that I see being like actually worthwhile. Technically, this can grab your Rest in Peace. It can grab other cards that are like sideboard options that I can't think of right now, but do exist. Which, you know, is nice, but when you think about a package like this, if you look at kind of the legacy version, or some of the legacy versions, you'll have Mystical Tutor, no, not Mystical Tutor, Enlightened Tutor. You'll have an Enlightened Tutor package. Enlightened Tutor essentially is this, but different because it is like 1 mana. I don't know why I just pressed Enlightened. But Enlightened Tutor is an instant for 1. You reveal the card and you put it on top, so it's not like card advantage, whereas this puts it directly into your hand. But this is sorcery and it costs 3. So one of the things that the Legacy Death and Taxes decks do, I did not realize that this card costs so much. I have one of these. I think I only have one though. Regardless, you have things like this. You have Canonist, Aetherstone Canonist. You have Rest in Peace. You have some other artifacts as well. And the fact that this hits artifacts too makes it like really usable. Like you can have this sideboard package where you bring in a Enlightened Tutor, you bring in, you know, your Rest in Peace and your Grafdigger's Cage. You know, you have 2 Rest in Peace, 1 Cage, 2 Enlightened Tutors, right? Something like that. And then it essentially means you're running 4 Rest in Peace and 3 Grafdigger's Cage, right? Because your Enlightened Tutors are essentially additional copies of that. When you're doing things with Enlightened or with Idyllic Tutor, you don't have that. Not only can this only get enchantments, it costs so much more mana to do. It's fine that it's a sorcery, that really doesn't matter too much. But the fact that it costs so much on the front end means that it's going to be very difficult for you to take the tempo loss of needing to use your entire turn to go grab something and then play that thing. Obviously, if it's against a graveyard deck, that might be fine. You know, that single turn might not matter. But if you're looking at some other enchantments that would help you out in different situations, like a Nyx's Ram, for example, against mono red, you know, taking that turn 3 off is probably just not as good as just playing another creature on turn 3. If this could hit artifacts as well, I would consider it more. Because then, like, you could have an actual, like, tutor package out of the sideboard, and I think it would be very helpful. But as it is, I just think it's too slow for the flexibility it might bring. Inspiring Cleric, if you're playing a lot of blink effects, Cleric can be very, very broken. Not broken, but very helpful against the red decks, right? I mean, you play this, you gain 4, it's a 3-2 body. You flicker it once, your opponent is doomed. That said, I do tend to prefer other things. Like, if I'm playing the green-white version, that does have, like, some ETB stylings, but I have Knight of Autumn. The blue version, this is fine, but generally speaking, I'd be playing a lot of Charming Prince, and I usually get enough value out of Charming Prince. Kinzali Summoning is another one of those 3-drop flying creatures that I just really like. It just forces your creatures your opponent's control to come in tapped. Your opponent's playing a bunch of hasty creatures? I don't care. You're attacking on the ground and your opponent is playing creatures? Well, guess what? The ones that you play, they're going to come and tap, and I'm going to keep attacking you. This also has flying, so it just doesn't even give a crap about your opponent playing dudes on the ground, especially since they're going to be tapped anyway. This card is just fantastic. With Burning Tree Emissary coming back in, there is a very high likelihood that we're going to see more Gruul, and this card stops haste from Gruul, which is really cool. Lavabrink Venturer, I just like this card because it essentially says, I'm going to choose the thing that screws you over the most, I'm going to have protection from that, and I'm going to beat you to death with my Venturer. She's really cool. That said, there are so many taxing cards in the 3-drop slot that it's very difficult for you to actually find room for this card. Mentor the Meek. We are playing a lot of weenie dudes. One issue that we have in this deck is card draw. So you would think that this is a great card. I disagree. The white-blue version and the white-green version, which are the ones that are most likely to not run Hushbringer, have other ways of gaining some sort of advantage, so they don't need this. The mono-white version, which is the one that, for me at least, is most likely to have Hushbringer, is not going to want to have an increased number of non-bows with it. And then the white-black and the red-white version often aren't going to necessarily need the resources as much, because their game plans are either, frankly, more annoying, i.e. like land destruction, or your creatures just coming back from the graveyard in the white-black version, or just like pinging them over time, that you just don't need this. I've not really found a place where this fits at the 3-drop slot, and wanting to constantly pay this. I've just not found the use for it. Bugler does not have the same issue. Yes, this is a non-bow with Hushbringer, but you can grab a lot of things with this card. Not just 1-drops, 2-drops, 3-drops, but you can grab some 5-drops. Consider Tristani, for example. You have some 4-drops. Consider, what is your name? The Azorius, the 4-mana 2/3 flyer that ATBs to draw a card and gain like 3 life or something like that. Right? That also has 2 power. So this card grabs a lot of things, and the only real downside of this card is the fact that it's a 3-drop. And it just competes with a lot of other really, really strong 3-drops. If you're looking for a card to kind of give you card advantage, this is one of the best ones for you, because it grabs so many other creatures in your deck. And you're looking at the top 4 cards. You get to choose from them. The deck is going to be playing so many hits that you often will be able to choose between reasonably like 2 or 3 things, and you just get the best card that you need. Also, it's a 2/3 with Vigilance, so that's nice. Prison Realm. It's like Banishing Light, except it is more narrow, although it lets you scry. It is worse than Banishing Light. The scry is not all that helpful, and it's more narrow. So, Rule of Law. We would rather have Aetherborn Canonist. This technically something that you can get with Idyllic Tutor, but right now there just aren't very many decks that are super comboing. There are plenty of decks that will play double spells. Mono Red is a great example of that. You cast a hasty creature, you attack with it, you deal damage, you play a light up the stage, right? Like that stops that. This stops that, but it comes down too slow to matter in most of the scenarios where Aetherborn Canonist would just be better. Shield Mare. It can be blocked by red creatures, which it would be better if it like. It'd be better if it like just didn't deal. If it just like didn't get dealt damage in combat by red creatures or something like that, so it could just block infinitely, but then it might be too good. This is one of those cards that can be very helpful in a red heavy meta. You get to game 3 when it enters, and if it gets bolted, you get to gain another 3. The thing is, your Gruul opponent, your mono red opponent, is likely not just going to shoot this thing. It does mean you can kind of sit back and block with it for a long time because it can't get lightning struck, whatever. But it's you need to have a specific meta where red is very prominent, and if it's not, this isn't as good. Slaughter the Strong. This allows you to hit super go wide decks. But if your opponent like has a questing beast, for example, even if you choose 2 of your 3-drops that have 2 power, they still have a questing beast that you can't block. So it's okay, but the fact that we have Dusk to Dawn now is just kind of pushes this out. Solemnity. Wasn't there a combo I was supposed to play with this? Did I make that combo deck? Bro, I don't even know. Players can't get counters. Counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. If you are looking to, keep your eye on something that might be a lot stronger once Kaladesh comes out, this is one of those cards. This will stop your opponent from getting energy counters. Your opponent's artifacts aren't going to be able to get charge counters. Obviously, this doesn't affect Planeswalkers, unfortunately, but if you are in a situation where there's a lot of counters going around, this is fine. This does stop Nissa's lands. Yes, this stops Nissa's lands. So if Nissa tries to use their plus when you have this in play, their creature turns into a 0/0 their land turns into a creature that has 0 power and 0 toughness, and it doesn't get the 3 counters on it, so it just dies due to state-based action. So this is one of those cards where it's something that isn't going to matter right now, but as Historic gets more cards, it has a higher likelihood of being used. Taranika is, I mean, she's like cool and all. She's, you know, at Gideon's final resting place or some shit, but she makes one of your creatures bigger, which is nice, but she herself isn't all that large. She's also a what's the word I'm looking for? She is a legend, so it's a little bit more annoying, and she fights with the same slot as a bunch of our other 3-drops here. Teo is actually quite interesting. If it weren't for the fact that Teo like is annoying with Thalia, Teo is actually pretty helpful against like the mono red burn decks, right? You have hexproof, so they have to hit Teo before they can do anything to you, and you just get to make 0/3 walls. That said, Teo essentially is just like 3 mana, gain 3 to 7, 3 to 8 life, which can be great, but often we would rather just have another like really strong beater. But if we don't, there's always timely reinforcements, and timely reinforcements, for what it's worth, is a little bit better in something more along the lines of a typical blue-white control deck. However, timely reinforcements is just great because you can gain 6 life with it, dude. 6 life, and you get 3 dudes if your opponent has more creatures out with you, and that's just nice chump blockers. It's not gonna always be necessary in your sideboard, but if you need it, you can use it. Unbreaking Formation. I don't like this card. It just costs too much. With Thalia out, it costs even more. If you're holding up a bunch of mana, like, you need to make sure you have a bunch of flash cards. And, I mean, we do have Aven Mind Sensor, we do have Containment Priest, but, you know, constantly holding up the mana is not as good. Obviously, like, if we had access to Aether Vial, right, this card would be a little stronger, because then we can use our Aether Vial to pump out our creatures, while having our mana up to use things like Unbreakable Formation, use things like Collected Company, right? Use removal, use our lands to destroy our opponent lands. So without that, this card is not as strong. Obviously, you can get a counter on them if you do it during your main phase, but I'm just not feeling it. Vizier of Deferment. The creature has to attack or block. It has flash, which is really nice. Like, don't get me wrong, the fact that this has flash makes it generally better than something along the lines of was it Fiend Hunter? Although I think Fiend Hunter is the old wording. Did I really spell Fiend wrong? No, I didn't. Yeah, Fiend Hunter is actually the old wording, so never mind. But the fact that it has flash is nice. It's just, it has to attack or block this turn. If it just exiled like normal, then it'd be great. It would be actually like great. Wingmare. It's Thalia, except it doesn't have first strike, but it does fly, and it's not legendary. Going Selfless Savior into Thalia, into Wingmare, is just crushing for a control opponent, or just like an Is It Spells opponent, right? You have your protection on turn 1, turn 2, you play something, it's like, oh darn, I can't play this kill spell on turn 2. I'll just wait till turn 3. Then you play a Wingmare, and they're like, it now costs me 3 mana to play a shock. Alright, I'll tap out, play my shock. Oh, I'm just going to sacrifice myself as Savior. Oh, cool. It still costs me 4 mana to play an Eliminate. 4 mana to, to play, I can't think of things. What's that damn card? Anticipate. Anything like that, right? It's just dumb. It's dumb and I love it. Also, just like early Seb McKinnon here. It's fantastic. Then we get into the blue splash. So as I said, white-blue tends to have a lot of nice ETB creatures. This is essentially our facsimile of Blade Splicer, right? Blade Splicer is a 1/1 that gives all of your golems first strike, and it ETBs makes a 3/3 golem. So it's 3 mana for a 1/1 and a 3/3, typically always first strike goblin. We don't have access to that, but we do have Illyrios, so this will enter the battlefield. It stays tapped while you have the reflection, which is a little unfortunate, so you don't have like a body to block with, but you do get a 3/2. And what's nice is that 3/2 is not legendary. So if you are blinking your Illyrios with your Charming Prince, with your Thassa, right, you're getting these extra tokens that can keep attacking. If we had Blade Splicer, we would be using that. The first strike coupled with Thalia is crisp. Then we have less of an issue against our more beefy creature opponents because we hold back Thalia and a 3/3, and now we can block an X5 while killing it, right? So it's pretty nice, but I've used Illyrius to some decent success, although that was before a lot of the newer cards, especially from Zeniker Rising, came out. So we'll see if it still makes the cut. Baron, Tellurian Archmage. This is nice. And this potentially, like there's potentially that Niambi legendary creature ETB deck that I was talking about in yesterday's video. And I can kind of see a deck like that maybe being used, and Baron would be pretty decent there, because 1, it's legend, 2, it bounces some of your things anyway, or it can bounce something of your opponents. But if this is out with Niambi, you're going to be able to also draw a card from this, not just Niambi's like discard ability thing. So I don't think this generally goes into the blue splash, but I think if you are able to construct a kind of legendaries Death and Taxes in a white-blue or an Esper build, then I think this would be a decent fit in there. I wish I had Flash, but... Brazen Borrower. This card is annoying as hell. You get to bounce something. You can't bounce your own creature, so it doesn't kind of work in that same bounce your own stuff deck. But you just get to bounce anything. It's very annoying, and it's a nice attacker. This is one of those cards that make me accept the fact that Death and Taxes can be considered a tempo deck, but you don't always need this. Also, I'm gonna say I will never not see, and this is how I know him. He also played what is that guy's name? Starkiller. I think it's Starkiller in The Force Awakens. No, The Force Unleashed? Star Wars Force Unleashed? Look, these names are all too familiar, but I'll always remember this dude as the vampire in Being Human, the American version of a British show. If you know who I'm talking about, let me know in the comments. But I can't not see him when I see this card. Chamber of Wits. Does draw cards, it can come back with Eternal Eyes. That's kind of the main thing, is the fact that this can come back for you. But it's like whatevs. It's not the strongest, but I did want to mention it. Cloud Concealer. This is flying, which, like, this is essentially, right? Essentially, this is the same as this. Except this you get to dig 2 deeper, but you do have to discard both cards. This can also come back. This just draws a card. It just replaces itself. You're not digging very deep, but it has flying, and it can't come back. If you're looking for more flyers, there are other cards that are probably going to be better than this, unfortunately. Exclusion Mage. It's annoying. Bounce your opponent's creatures. If you're looking to play annoying-ass bounce and taxes, this is what you want. Kira the Great Glass Spinner. Typically, you'll see this from Legacy Merfolk decks. For what it's worth, I don't know if Merfolk is even strong right now in Legacy. You'll have to ask the professor about that. And I also don't know if they play this card. But it does mean that your creatures are going to be a lot more protected against your opponent's direct removal. This is not just spells, it's also abilities. So your opponents are going to be having a more difficult time using creatures to remove things, using planeswalkers to remove things. It has its place. If you're finding that you're coming up against a decent amount of target removal and you're in blue already, this is an okay choice, but do pay attention to your amount of double white and double blue pips if you are trying to play other lands such as Ghost Quarter and its ilk. It's good dispute. This is actually, so I talked about Dovin's Veto, and I said Dovin's Veto isn't really a card what we're looking for. But that's because Dovin's Veto costs 2 mana. This can cost 1 mana if your opponent is playing a blue spell. If you're coming up against a lot of blue decks, feel free to play the spell. Otherwise, man. I will say, I would absolutely love if Wizards put Mana Tithe into Historic. I think that would be fucking hilarious. I would play it like that. Mana Tithe is a 1 mana white instant that just says counter target spell unless its controller plays 1. It's fucking hilarious, dude. I love it. Nimble Obstructionist is really cool. It's a flash flyer, which is really what we like to have. You can cycle it, so you essentially just discard it and you pay some mana, whatever, you can draw a card. But if you do, you counter target activated or triggered ability you don't control. Now, obviously, the fact that you can't control it might be an issue somewhere in very certain situations, but the reason this is awesome is because you can just cycle this to stop the ultimate of a Planeswalker. You can cycle this to stop some big ETB trigger or a land trigger, for example, if you're dealing with some of that nonsense. This card can do so many great things, and you get a card draw out of it. You're also, because it's a cycle ability, you can't counter the thing with a normal counterspell. You can still use not Trick Pine. Trick Pine's not in this format. You can use the Simic card whose name I'm forgetting, Repudiate, I think. You can use that, but otherwise your opponent isn't going to be able to counter the cycling portion of this, which is fantastic. And then if you don't need it, you have a 3-mana flash flyer with free power, and you can start hitting your opponent. This is actually a really decent card. It just competes with a bunch of other 3-drop creatures. Sea Dasher Octopus. It has flash, which is cool, and it draws cards, which is cool. If there's probably some sort of blue-white flash taxes deck. I could see that. I could see some sort of blue-white flash taxes. There are probably a sufficient number of creatures that do that. And in that deck, you might want this. So I could see that. I could see that being reasonable. Otherwise, in a general white-blue deck, I don't think it's worth it. Bastion of Remembrance. I think this is one of the cards that might be a little bit better in the kind of aristocrat taxes deck. But once again, I'm just not sure. The fact that it's enchantment does make me pause. You do make a human token, which is really cool. And it just drains your opponent, which is great, but it's an enchantment. Call of the Death Dweller is really great. One of the nice things about the black version of Death and Taxes is that you can just keep having your creatures come back. So this can get you a Selfless Savior and a Thalia. This can grab you an Elcid and a Tithe Taker. This could grab you a Hateful Eidolon and maybe even a Femia. I don't know if you're playing that, but it can grab Hateful Eidolon and something else. Or it can just grab one of your great 3-drops. If your opponent is playing a bunch of deck searching, you can go ahead and get your Aven Mindcensor back that they killed. It's just a very flexible card in a deck that runs a ton of 1, 2, and 3-drop creatures. It's decent. It's just decent. It is a non-creature. Drana, she hits people and she makes your creatures bigger. She's cool, but she is not really a Death and Taxes card. Elspeth's Nightmare does a lot of different things. It's an enchantment though, which makes me sad because it's not as good. This isn't I wouldn't put this in the Hateful Eidolon deck. I kind of just wouldn't necessarily play this. It has a lot of great control elements, but it's not the type of control that we can really get away with consistently in a Death and Taxes deck. Spectre, though, can be stupid. In the discard version of this deck, one of the things that you'll still want is to have creatures that are still attacking, right? Your primary goal isn't to remove their hand and then win from them not having a hand via things like Davriel, via things like Waste Not giving you zombie tokens or whatever. The way you still want to win is via creatures just chipping them down. The reason you play the discard is so that they don't have any cards in hand to create a plan against what you're doing. And Hypnotic Spectre helps really well against that, because not only are you dealing damage with a flyer, which is nice, but it's making them discard at random, so they don't even get a choice in which card they're going to give up. So Hypnotic Spectre, specifically in the discard version, is quite interesting. Liliana Standard Bearer, hey look, it's another flash card. If your opponent is blowing you out, your opponent blows up your field, flash this bad boy in. You get to gain some cards, and you have a 3/1. In that specific context, it's very nice. The main issue is still you'll have to have a reason to hold up your mana, and you have to suspect that your opponent is playing this. For that reason, I haven't really gotten value out of it. Midnight Reaper, on the other hand, Midnight Reaper starts off in play, so you're not holding up this mana constantly. You're playing this forward, and even if they just destroy this, you're going to get a card out of it. Sure, you're going to lose a life, but when you're in a situation where your battle is against card advantage, that life loss isn't going to matter too much. Against the more aggressive decks, you do need to be aware of this card's presence, because it can very easily reap you. But generally speaking, this is just really nice to have against a control opponent, right? You go turn 1 something, turn 2 something, turn 3 this. if you can play something on turn 4 and then they wrath you, you're still going to be getting 4 cards, or you're sacrificing Selfless Squire to keep something of yours alive. You're still getting 3 cards, you still have something on board, and it's just generally really nice. Murderous Rider. It's a creature that can kill things. I mean, that's about it, honestly. It is removal, and it has lifelink. Like, what's not to love? Cards are great. Never to Return is like Murderous Rider, but it isn't. 1, it's not a creature. 2, it's not an instant, but it doesn't cost you life, and you get to exile with it. It's not as good. Phyrexian Razor. This is a poor man's Midnight Reaper. If you don't have the wild cards for it, Phyrexian Razor can kind of sort of get you there. Kind of sort of, but not really. Plague Raptor. I mean, we have weenies, but typically we want those weenies to stick around. Plague Raptor's not that great. Kills our weenies. Plague Mare, on the other hand, it's pretty nice. If your opponents are playing a bunch of X1s, you play this and you're like, ha, get screwed. If Death and Taxes becomes an actual historic deck, which then a white-black version can just be mean, like just bully them, right? You're killing their Thalias, their Rin Wingmares, their Aven Mind Sensors, their Nimble Obstructionists, their Selfless Saviors and whatnot, and this gets around Selfless Savior. So yeah, this card has potential. I don't think it's there right now, but I think if we get to a situation where people are playing a lot more X1s, if people are playing a lot more Cavalcade decks, then this absolutely could see some play. Virulent Plague. Man, it's a good thing Field of the Ruin isn't around. If it was, or Field of the Dead, I can speak human words. If it were, this is the card you want. We don't need it right now, but it's there, just in case. Blood Sun. Very similar. If Field of the Dead were still around, this would be reasonable just in the sideboard of a general red splash. You can't really play this in a land destruction red splash because of the fact that it makes your lands lose their ability to destroy your opponent's lands. So really, it's just here as has Wizards released some sort of monster that's a land into the format? And if so, this is what you have access to. Bookshire Giant. It's essentially the same thing as Murderous Rider. It's removal with a body, and this body makes it so your opponent will have a tax if they try to kill it, which means you can apply the death. It's fantastic. A very strong card. I very much like the versatility that Bonecrusher Giant and Murderous Rider bring. It's very nice. Dualcaster Mage. It has flash. It can be interesting, but you really have to have very specific things occur. The main reason for that is you're not going to be using Dualcaster Mage on one of your own things, so it becomes dependent on what your opponent's playing. It's best to stick Dualcaster Mage with its wizard friends. They don't belong here. Rampaging Frostodon. Are you tired of people going turn 1 Sarah Ascendant into Sarah's Attendant? Who knows? I don't care. Into Johnny's Pridemate, into some nonsense like Heliod. Rampaging Frostodon is for you. Players can't gain life, and whenever they play their annoying creatures, you deal 1 damage to them. Also, it has menace, so it's annoying to block. This is great. This is just strong in the main deck of the Red Splash. Against goblins, they're going to just like this against goblins means that you don't have to worry as much about Krenko, because Krenko just like pumping out a bunch of goblins can just dome your opponent to death. And you don't have to worry as much about Muxus, because as long as you get a certain amount of damage off from your flyers, because remember, you have flyers, they don't. You'll be able to potentially yeet them into the stratosphere if they use their own Muxus. Fantastic card. Do be wary that it means that you can't gain life, and you hurt yourself whenever you play one of your weenies. So against aggro decks, be careful. Sin Prodder is like Bob. At the beginning of your upkeep, you reveal the top card. Your opponent either has you bid it and they get hurt, or you just get to put the card in your hand. So let's say you have Sin Prodder out. First of all, I should say it has menace, which means cool, you can just hit them. It's hard for them to block. But once you have Sin Prodder out, you reveal a card. It's a land. They could just put it in your graveyard for free, but you're still going to see the next card anyway. So let's say they put it in your graveyard for free. Sure, that's fine, whatever. You draw a card. Remember, they didn't see this card. They don't know what it is. It's whatever card you want. Let's say instead, you have Sim Prodder, and it's a 3-drop. Now, they can choose either to take 3 damage and put that away, while you still get to draw a card, or they're like, oh, I can't take this. You get that card, and then you draw another card. It's real nice. This is just an annoying card for your opponents to deal with. It gives you card advantage in a deck that really wants it. Yeah, it's also a devil, which could potentially be important. Spiteful Prankster is another devil. Has first strike on your turn, so it's similar to this devil, but a little different, obviously. Whenever another creature dies, this deals 1 damage to target player or planeswalker. So, if you're this is a card where you can have some of that vibe of, the Blood Artist in the red version, where if your control opponent board wipes you, then you still get, like, the last laugh. You still get to hit them for some amount. Now, for what it's worth, this does say another creature, so it doesn't count itself, which is very frustrating, but it's still nice. And you don't have to hit them. You can hit their planeswalker. So it has some sort of flexibility, and once again, could potentially be used because it's a devil. This thing also stops people from gaining life and makes devils. Speaking of devils, I should say speak of the devil. Oh, I'm bad. Zerdoth is a 3-mana 2/3, and whenever an opponent draws their first card each turn, if it's not their turn, they make a devil. Or you make a devil. That pings. It's the same devil that Tybalt makes. Whenever one or more devils you control attack one or more players, you and those players each draw a card. Then discard a card at random. This is a bit more of a cute Death and Taxes build, potentially, but essentially what you do is you play a decent number of devils that are usable. You play some very nice, 1-mana cards, or 1 and 2-mana Death and Taxes pieces, and then you kind of just keep hitting your opponent and make a board that your opponent can't really wrath because they just die. That said, this is not nearly as strong against aggro decks, so it's more of a meme Taxes build, but it's still a thing. Dead Gorge Scavenger. It's like Skoos, but worse. It can attack. When it enters, you do get a trigger out of it, which is nice. It's a 3/2 to start with, which is okay, but you'd kind of rather it be a 2/3 just because of the fact that you want it to survive against like a shock or something. But you get to exile something. If it's a creature, you get 2 life, so it is more than Scavenging Ooze, but it doesn't grow for creatures. It only grows for non-creatures. And it's not a counter, though. It's only until end of turn. It's not Skoos. It's just not Skoos. Harbinger is interesting. It's a bit of a Chungus. The thing that's nice about it, though, is that it's a bit of Chungus, right? Like, your opponent's not going to necessarily want to block it, and if it hits them or a planeswalker even, then you can just kind of, it essentially just says draw a card, right? You're running so many creatures that you're very frequently going to be able to get a card with this. It's not something that I've used in any of my builds personally, any of my Green Splash builds, but I can definitely see the value in it. My Green Splash builds so far have mostly been like ETB triggers, but if I weren't using that, then this is definitely a card that I would at least consider. Jadelight Ranger, I kind of talked about how I feel about Explore in general when I talked about the Merfolk Branchwalker, but Jadelight Ranger has double Explore. It still works with your 1/1 counters matter stuff. It essentially has the same evaluation as Branchwalker. Jang Yangu has 1/1 counter synergy, but the reason I wanted to talk about this one is because I think this is more of a trap card. We don't really want... Like the extra mana doesn't really matter, and paying 3 mana for a card that kind of only cared about 1/1 counters, as I think we talked about at some point yesterday, it's just not something that we want. We don't want a card that only does 1/1 counters things. We want a card that can do both or is very strong, like Legion Ascendant or something. Llanowar Visionary does draw us a card, which is nice, but we have so many other things to do at 3, and as I said with Jang, we don't need the ramp. Looming Shaman is a very interesting way to deal with graveyard shenanigans. You get to just shuffle any number of target cards from a single player, and you have to target that player, so that is something you have to keep in mind. But you get to shuffle any of them back. Technically, that can be helpful against like a crackling Drake. But other than that, it's going to most likely just be better to have something like Rest in Peace or something like a Skoos. Beauty and the Beast here are pretty decent. We don't have a ton of 1-drops, so having kind of essentially an additional 1-drop is nice. The fact that it wouldn't be able to attack isn't necessarily the worst thing, because what's really nice about Lovestruck Beast is the fact that against other green decks, against other large creature decks, this can block profitably. We do have some 1/1s. You know, we have the Alcid, we have a Selfless Savior, so it's not unlikely that we're going to attack. I just personally have not found room for this because, once again, 3 is like the competitive spot. Manglehorn is similar to Knight of Autumn, except it only focuses on artifacts. It does make it so your opponent's your artifacts your opponents control and are tapped. But I really like Knight of Autumn because of the sheer versatility. If like once we get Kaladesh, it's very possible that this card is going to be still worth like a sideboard slot in the green version, even like above Knight of Autumn, just if there are that many artifacts that really matter. But if not, we might not need it. Pride Malkin, just like Jang Yengu, this card only is a like 1/1 counter thing, so I just wanted to mention it and say, meh. Prowling Serpent part is similar to Destiny Spinner. The main difference, of course, is the fact that this itself can't be countered, and obviously it costs 1 additional mana. It does come with 2 more points of power, which is nice. Don't get me wrong, and it's a cool like cat snake. But I personally prefer Destiny Spinner because it comes down earlier and doesn't compete with a bunch of the other 3-drops. Ramunap Excavator, I can speak human words. There's possibly the kind of like a Maverick style deck here where we use things like Ramunap Excavator, we use Aven Mind Sensor, we use Ghost Quarters, right? We use Knight of Autumn, or not Knight of Autumn, sorry, Knight of the Reliquary. We use things like that in order to kind of terrorize our opponent's lands with our own lands. So there is we can also, for what it's worth, we can also technically like use cycling lands to a better degree because we can cycle them and then still like play them as lands. The lion. But this card costs $13. Did not realize. Anyway, sorry, I got distracted. I like this art better. Why is this one less expensive? Probably the timestamp. Sorry, I'm getting distracted. Anyway, that has potential. Rishkar is one of those the counters ones that aren't as bad. You might be looking at this and say, isn't this just Jang Yengu? Yes and no. The reason I say no is because it's a creature, so it doesn't cost more with Thalia out. Also, it enters and you can immediately put like extra counters on things, right? Jang, you have to spread them out over the course of several turns. This, like, you put a counter on your 2-drop, you put a counter on Rishkar, bada bing, bada boom. The way that it comes, like, it still has the whole ramp, but for what it's worth, like, this technically works in more scenarios because it's a counter, not just a +1/+1 counter. So if you do happen to have Luminous Broodmoth, and some of your creatures are flying, those creatures, even if they don't have a +1/+1 counter, can still tap for mana. So, for what it's worth, I still haven't actually used this card. Yeah. Runic Armasaur. I wish it was better. Whenever an opponent activates an ability of an artifact, a creature or land, and isn't a mana ability, you may draw a card. Like, you can get some stuff with things like Castle Ventress. You can get some stuff with like Magmatic Channeler, I think is the name of that new card. Like, you'll get things sometimes, but either it should be like artifact or land, or creature or artifact. Like, artifact just gives you so much more, and like green already hates artifacts anyway, so it makes me sad. Also, like, the stat line isn't the best, because if you're going against a deck that is using lands with like extra abilities, typically that's going to be a more control-y deck, and you don't need 5 toughness, and you rather have like more power. Like, if this was a 3/4, I would love it. If this was a 5/2, I would not. That's too much on the other side. A 4/4, no, it couldn't be a 4/4, because then you'd be adding a thing. But 3/4 would be very nice, but it's an option. Citizen Champion. We're not doing auras. Technically speaking, there is possibly a world where you do an Abzan build that utilizes the Hateful Eidolon package and a bunch of specifically enchantment creatures, such that you aren't actually using Citizen Champion because of auras. You just are using Citizen Champion alongside of these other artifact or enchantment creatures that have these extra abilities. We kind of already talked about Ephemia, but you technically could use a lot of obstruction in that case. The main issue is making sure you have a sufficient number of tax cards for it to still to be like Death and Taxes and not just Abzan enchantments, right? Swarwood Weaver. I love this card so much. Hexproof from blue does not matter. They could technically bounce it, but that's it. Hexproof from blue is like the worst hexproof, right? Like white has removal, red has removal, even green has removal, and black has removal. Like blue is not the color of removal; it's just color of like bouncing things, and or I guess technically they could enchant this and like make it like not usable. But meh. What's really nice is that you can just have this out, and if you're getting dealt damage, you get to gain life and make a dude. This is reasonable against something along the lines of the Young Pyromancer deck, right? That deck is running things like Claim the Firstborn, but it's also just like running a bunch of tiny little dudes. This is very nice against a bunch of tiny little dudes. Have an army of spiders. It's an option. I don't currently use it, but it's something there that can be used in a certain metagame. Terravore potentially would be in the deck that has Ramunap Excavator and Knight of the Reliquary, but I'm not convinced that you would need those necessarily. I think the deck would be better served just having a bunch of things that, you know, a bunch of like land interactivity that yeets things into and out of your own graveyard, your own lands, as opposed to just trying to get a bunch of lands in the graveyard. I could be wrong. Versus our own games, very similar to Elspeth's Nightmare. This is very nice for what it does. Like, it does a lot of cool things, but generally speaking, you know, having this after you've cast Thalia on turn 2 is just not really something you want to see. Thrashing Bronodon. It's like Knight of Autumn, except this is actually a better comparison, in my opinion, than something like Manglehorn, because this at least has a really like a strong power toughness, and you get to kind of just have this out early, right? With Knight of Autumn, if you know you're playing against artifacts or enchantments, you're possibly going to want to just hold Knight of Autumn until you find a good position to use it, so you can kind of be losing out on the death part of your Death and Taxes. Whereas with Thrashing Bronodon, you can play this card, attack your opponent with it, and then you have it as a threat for when your opponent is going to play their cards. You also you can just like choose to hold it. Right, so if you know, if your opponent plays an artifact or enchantment when you have Knight of Autumn, even if that was their bluff artifact or enchantment, you might just want to cast your Knight of Autumn, even if that was their bluff thing, because you need to get your beat stick down. It's fine, shut up. But with Bronodon, you can say, well, they're not really using it. I don't have to tap my Bronodon to use its ability. I'm just going to keep hitting you, and then use it when I want. Vivian, Champion of Wilds, we have a lot of creatures. This is a planeswalker that I actually would consider using because it gives all of your creatures flash. So you'd be able to, I mean, you should be able to do dumb things. Your opponent is in their upkeep and they just cracked. Well, no, in fact, Fabled Passage wouldn't work there. I'm trying to think of something to shut up. I don't know. They cast a creature. Here's what they do. Your opponent has a lot of mana. They cast an Opt on their turn because they need something, right? In response, you flash in Archon, and once Archon resolves, they can only use one spell this turn, right? I think they've already cast a spell. I have to double check Archon, but I'm pretty sure that's how that works. And also, she just like gets to get you more card advantage. She's actually decent. Although her Bunder, Heat Bunder. We're not a Vigilance deck. Some of our creatures have Vigilance, not all of them do. Ashok Dreamrender. It can deal with like searching, but we already have cards like that. It can deal with the graveyard, but we already have cards like that. Centaur Peacemaker. If you really need life gain against these freaking aggro decks, this will gain you life. It gains them some life as well, but in the aggro matchup, you're the control deck. Deafening Clarion. We have creatures. We don't want them to die. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much it. Deputy of Detention. This card is so good. You get to just, like, you get to exile things. And because they have things that share the same name, if your opponent keeps using their Nissa on forest, you get to exile none of the forest because it's non-land. Haha, you thought I was stupid. No, I was right. But no, like you get to exile multiple tokens. You get to exile just like duplicate copies of things. And what's nice is if your opponent plays something that is more threatening, you get to Charming Print it or something like that, and return to the battlefield, detaining something else. I love this card. It's fantastic. Also, artwork is great. Dovin. He does cool things, but he's a planeswalker that doesn't necessarily do all of the things we're looking at. Dovin actually does the things that we want. This card is actually pretty nice in Death and Taxes, and you don't even have to be playing the blue splash for it. Artifacts, instants, and sorcery spells your opponent's cost one more to cast. Just your opponent's. If you're going against a control deck that your opponent is playing, this card is not bad. Until your next turn, prevent all damage that will be dealt to and by target permanent and opponent controls. Your opponent has like one creature on the field or something like that. Shut it down. It's nice. It's not bad. General Goodroll. We have a lot of humans, but that doesn't necessarily matter. When a human enters the battlefield, including himself, which is nice, you get to exile a card from an opponent's graveyard. You can also sacrifice 2 humans to destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. Now, sometimes, like, sacrificing 2 humans, not the best. But when it comes to something like Questing Beast, you're probably going to have to sacrifice 2 humans anyway. And they're probably going to have to be decent. You're going to have to sacrifice 2 creatures anyway. And they're going to have to be strong because Questing Beast can't be blocked by chumps. So it's a decent choice. It's not the best choice, but it's a decent choice. And it could be played in kind of a more human-centric Death and Taxes deck. And Warlord likes you to go wide. I don't like that it likes you to go wide. It is a mana sink, which is nice. But other than that, it's not really something that I have even. I haven't even like tried this card, but I just don't think it's worth running. Jubilant Skybunder. We have a lot of flyers, and this is very similar. This is very similar to Kira, except the mana cost is technically less restrictive. No, I mean, that's pretty much it. I think Kira also flies. Creatures you control with flying have spells your opponents cast that target this creature costs 2 more. It's similar to Kira, but it's different. The main difference is the fact that it's a little easier to cast, technically. I like it. I've not used it. It's not like worth a slot, generally speaking. Kaya does really cool things. She gets to just exile stuff, which is really nice. The main issue is we just have better graveyard hate. Even in black, we have better graveyard hate. Knight of Autumn. This card has so many versatile options. It can be a beat stick. It can yeet a artifact or enchantment. It can just gain you life and block. It does everything that you want it to do. And you can flicker it. Chef's kiss. It's great. Another Reliquary. It's a little bit bigger for each land card in your graveyard. Sure, whatever. You sacrifice a forest or a plains, and you get to search your library for a land card and put it on the battlefield. Notice this is not put on the battlefield tapped. You just put it on the battlefield, and you don't have to sacrifice an untapped forest or plains. So you can tap a forest for some mana, sacrifice it, go grab like a Ghost Court or something, and use it immediately. Right? You can do things like that. You can have a one of a Bajuka Bog in your deck when you're running something like this. There are a number of options where you can just grab these kind of tech lands to get benefits out of them. So I haven't actually explored that yet, but I do plan on it. Kunaros. Kunaros is cool, right? Vigilance, Menace, Lifelink. Fantastic keywords. Hard to block, and you get to attack with and block with. Creature cards in graveyards can't enter the battlefield. That does stop escape. Cool. Nice. Players can't cast spells from graveyards. Also kind of nice. This will stop. I'm pretty sure Dreadhorde Arcanist does cast them from a graveyard. I don't think he exiles them first. But things like that, things like Jumpstart, those are all things that you're going to be able to hit with Kunaros. That said, we do have some other options, and some versions of the Black Splash are going to want some creatures of yours to re-enter. Don't play this with Call of the Death Dweller, for example. But this is still just generally a good card if you're not playing cards like that. It's just a really nice hound that does tax your opponent's ability to do nonsense. And with Earl running around so much, boom, I mean, it's just nice. Lurrus. We would have to cut out a lot of our 3-drops. I mean, we'd have to cut out all of our 3-drops if we're trying to use this as a companion. But we don't need to use this as a companion. Right. We can cut down slightly on the number of 3-drops, include, 2 or 3 of these in the main, and just have more 1 and 2s that are really strong that we get repeatable use out of. Right. With this, things like Elcid and things like Selfless Savior are even better. I would say, if you're going to use this, don't use it alongside, don't use it as a companion. Just use it in the main deck, and you have just value of getting your creatures back over and over again. It's generally nice. And then you can even play this with Call of the Death Dweller to get back your dead Lurruses. It's nice. It's nice. It is nice. It's just nice. I should mention Lurrus is also quite good in the Hateful Eidolon version, because you can get back your Eidolon, but you can also get back a lot of the removal that Eidolon uses. So that is another consideration you should make. Mortify. It is removal, but if we're playing the black-white version, we have other ways of dealing with enchantments potentially, but also we just have a better 2-mana removal, which is just kind of what we want. Necropanther. It's like Lurrus, except it gets CMC 3 or less instead of just 2 or less. It's not repeatable technically. It does have to mutate onto a non-human, so if you do end up using Necropanther, you need to make sure that you recognize the number of humans in your deck and try not to have very many of them. Although that doesn't seem too terribly hard. Yeah, that doesn't actually seem too terribly hard. If you just run Thalia and then everything else is not human, you could probably get away with that. Especially in the Black Splash. Yeah, that should actually be probably fine. I'm inclined to go more towards Lurrus, though. That's just my style. Oath of Kaya. We're not planning on playing a bunch of Planeswalkers. This is not actually all that great. Profane Procession is really cool. I love this card, and I essentially only want to talk about it because of how much I love this card. This card is just a really cool enchantment, but it's not a Death and Taxes card. Tajik. He prevents all non-combat damage that would be dealt to other creatures you control. If your opponents are trying to lightning strike your Thalia, not going to happen. This is also just a really nice card to attack in with. It has haste. It makes your Thalias bigger. It makes your flyers bigger. In a red build, you can have a Death and Taxes list that is a little bit more aggressive on the creature side because of something like Tajik specifically, and it still would be a nice Death and Taxes deck. Curving Selfless Savior into Thalia into this is really nice, right? Because then you could attack immediately with your Savior, your Thalia, and Tajik. Tajik can mentor the Thalia, so she's a 3/2 now with First Strike. Tajik is obviously a 3/2 as well, and you just get some really nice early-ish damage that your opponent can't just lightning strike, right? They're going to have to use actual removal on, and the removal is going to cost more because of your Thalia, and you can still use things like Selfless Savior to protect them. Crystalline Giant can do a lot of cool things. It is technically versatile, but it is random. We do not want randomness in a deck where we really are trying to maximize our little percentages. Catcher's Monument. We play a lot of white creatures. Whenever we cast a creature, we make tokens. I want to love this card. I really want to love it, but it's an artifact and not a creature. I want to love this card, but I can't. Now we get to the new Zeniker cards. Archon of Myria is fantastic. It's 3 mana 2/3, a bunch of the things that we like. Has flying. Each player can't cast more than one spell each turn. Very fantastic, kind of let us say earlier. Non-basic lands your opponent's control enter the battlefield tapped. Just our opponents. We do not care. We get to play our Ghost Quarters and stuff untapped. This is real nice. It's real nice in all of the decks. It's even better in a land destruction deck, because we just really deny their mana and just hit them. Maul of the Skyclaves. I've not actually used this card yet, but I have seen people use it to decent effectiveness or efficiency. Not both. It ETBs immediately enters attached to something, and it gets +2/+2 and has flying and first strike. That that is not something to downplay. Like, that buff is huge. The equip cost is relatively large, but when we're playing just a bunch of like weenies, we might like run out of gas and not have anything to do with our lands. So this is good. Skyclave Apparition. There's a 4 of in like every deck. This card's great. Obviously, like, it can be removed and your opponent gets value out of it, yada yada yada. You can kind of see what happens when I played against Azorius Death and Taxes with my Bolas control deck. But just generally speaking, this just removes something. Sure, they can get a random creature token, but it's just a creature token. So if you're able to blink that or something, it's fine. And likely you're going to be getting rid of something that you otherwise wouldn't be able to deal with anyway, or just something that's more annoying, right? Trading this in, like to give them a 4/4 that has no abilities when you've gotten rid of a questing beast, that is a reasonable trade. Getting rid of one of their Karns, getting rid of gosh, I mean, I can't think of everything, but you know, just getting rid of a bunch of things to give them essentially garbage is always worth it. Glasspool Mimic, it could be a land. It can also just be another one of your like Thalias or something. But when you have no creatures out, what you don't want is a card that has to be a land. So I don't like the idea of this card, but maybe it has some room. Agadeem's Awakening can be a land, but this land can come in untapped, and we're playing a lot of 1, 2, and 3 drops. If we flood out, this might just be fantastic. Right, paying 6 total to just get stuff back is quite nice when you flood out. Inscription of Ruin does a lot of things. It's not a creature, so I'm probably not going to test with this card. If you want to test with this card, feel free. Nodok Scavenger. We prefer to just get rid of the cards in the graveyard, but this does just like have Death Touch and Lifelink, so it might honestly just be worth it. Because of just how strong it is, generally speaking. I've not played with it yet. Obviously, Zeniker is still relatively new, so I haven't really gotten a chance to understand if this card is good in any version of the Black and Taxes. Relic Robber. This can be put into the annoying ping them to death deck. Not only does this work really nicely with Rampaging Frostodon because of the creature entering the battlefield. You know, that player creates the 0/1 Goblin, so that's a creature entering the battlefield. Yeah, it's a creature. Okay, I thought it was a creature. I just wanted to make sure. They make the little creature token. Why is this even a creature? I don't know, but whatever. So they lose 1 life from that, and then of course at the beginning of each of their upkeeps, they lose an extra point. It's hilarious. What's interesting, I think. Where are you? Yeah, so it also works really nicely with Spiteful Prankster because this is whenever another creature dies. Not just another creature you control. So if you have that alongside Relic Robber, you're giving these creatures to, let's say, your control opponent. They wrath the board. Not only are you getting to ping them for each of your creatures that died, but you also get to ping them with a bunch of like their annoying creatures that they had no choice in having. I have not built this version yet, but it is something that I'm definitely looking forward to playing around with because I think it's funny. Oran Reef Ooze. This can go into counters deck, but it's kind of an only counters thing, so I'm not in love with it, as you probably know. And lastly, Scoot Swarm. We're not degenerate land players, so this isn't really great. Even if you're playing like the Knight of the Reliquary deck, I don't think you're going to be getting to 6 mana, to 6 lands often enough. And even if you did, we're not making the Scoot Swarm like any different. Like, we're not making it bigger or mutating it or anything like that, so I just don't think it's worth I think it's worth running. That is the end of this episode. I hope you've enjoyed this. Once again, if there's anything in the 3 CMC slot, or even if you want to go back to the 1 or 2 CMC slot and let me know, I will try to address that in the next episode. Next episode, obviously, is the 4 CMC, and I can't wait to see you there. I'd like to thank my lovely patrons, especially Fogwind, for the continued support. If you'd like to join them and support the show, you'll find links in the description below. I do, of course, hope you've enjoyed this video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all of that good stuff really, really does help out the channel. And, of course, all will be one.